An arrogant cop spit on a tomb guard's face, thinking he was just another nobody in a beat-up car. She laughed, humiliated him, and tore apart everything that honored his service. But what she didn't know was that this man wasn't just any guard. He was a silent hero, holding a secret that could end her entire career in one blow. Then, just 10 minutes later, everything changes. So now the real question is, what happens when a bully spits on the wrong man, and the world sees who he truly is? Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you are watching from. Seeing your comments really reminds me why I do this every day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Arlington National Cemetery as Marcus Washington completed his final steps in the ceremonial guard change at the tomb of the unknown soldier. His movements were precise, each step measured with the same unwavering dedication he'd shown for the past 3 years of service. The rifle in his hands moved with fluid grace as he executed the final movements of his shift, a dance of honor he had performed countless times before. In the guard quarters afterward, Marcus carefully removed his ceremonial uniform, each piece treated with the reverence it deserved. His fellow guards nodded respectfully as he departed, though few knew that the quiet man among them had earned the nation's highest military honor. Marcus preferred it that way. The Medal of Honor in his modest apartment stayed tucked away in a simple wooden box, much like the memories of that harrowing day in Afghanistan that earned it. He pulled on worn jeans and a clean but faded blue cotton shirt, clothing that reflected his humble approach to life. His weathered hands, marked by years of service both in combat and at the tomb, moved automatically as he tied his shoes. A quick glance in the mirror showed a tall, lean man whose bearing spoke of military precision, even in civilian clothes. "See you tomorrow, Marcus," called out Jenkins, one of the younger guards. "Take care," Marcus replied softly, offering a slight smile as he headed for the parking lot. His 10-year-old sedan waited in its usual spot, paint slightly dulled but mechanically sound, much like its owner, reliable without drawing attention. Marcus settled into the driver's seat, taking a moment to breathe in the peaceful quiet. These transitions from guard duty to civilian life always felt sacred to him, a bridge between two worlds he navigated daily. Across town, Officer Brenda Kellerman adjusted her mirror, admiring how her badge caught the light. Her patrol car idled at a strategic spot near a busy intersection, but her attention wasn't on public safety. Her eyes narrowed as she watched for her preferred targets. Older vehicles, working-class drivers who couldn't afford lengthy legal battles. "Got another one?" she smirked into her radio, pulling out to tail a delivery van with a slightly dim taillight. The driver's hands trembled as he handed over his license, and Kellerman's smile widened. These were the moments she lived for, the power to make others squirm. "That's going to be $200, she declared, though the infraction typically carried a much smaller fine. When the driver began to protest, she rested her hand meaningfully on her weapon. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss this downtown?" The man's shoulders slumped as he accepted the citation. Kellerman watched him drive away, already scanning for her next victim. Her quota wasn't official, it couldn't be, legally, but her supervisors understood her methods brought in reliable revenue. The complaints filed against her disappeared as regularly as her performance bonuses appeared. Meanwhile, Marcus guided his sedan along the quiet road that wound past Arlington's western edge. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and his thoughts drifted to the soldiers he'd honored that day. Every step at the tomb was a tribute to their sacrifice. Every moment of his watch, a promise to remember. He didn't notice Kellerman's patrol car until her lights flashed in his mirror. Marcus checked his speed. He'd been driving exactly at the limit, and signaled as he pulled to the curb. Years of military discipline kept his movements calm and deliberate as he placed his hands where they would be visible on the steering wheel. Kellerman approached with her usual swagger, flashlight beam deliberately aimed to blind, despite the lingering daylight. "License and registration," she barked, not bothering with the customary greeting or explanation for the stop. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus responded quietly, maintaining his composure as he reached slowly for his documents. The practiced patience that served him through firefights and ceremonies now helped him weather this unnecessary confrontation. "Step out of the vehicle," Kellerman demanded, though there was no legitimate reason for the order. She'd already decided this ordinary-looking man in his modest car would be today's example of her authority. Marcus complied with measured movements, his military bearing evident even as he submitted to the unnecessary instruction. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" "You can ask all you want at the station," Kellerman sneered, her hand resting on her weapon in a practiced gesture of intimidation. She hadn't run his license yet, hadn't even fabricated a reason for the stop. She didn't need to, not with the connections that kept her complaint file mysteriously empty. What she couldn't know was that the quiet man standing before her had faced down worse threats than her petty display of power. Marcus Washington had earned his Medal of Honor by saving 30 fellow soldiers from certain death, moving through gunfire to reach them when no one else would risk the attempt. But that wasn't something he would mention. Not to her, not to anyone. His heroism spoke through his actions, not his words. The sun sank lower behind the cemetery's trees as the two stood facing each other, the corrupt officer drunk on her small measure of power, and the humble hero who had never needed a badge to prove his worth. Their confrontation was just beginning, though neither could guess how this evening would transform both their lives. Marcus stood perfectly still, his eyes steady but non-threatening, as Kellerman circled him with exaggerated suspicion. His thoughts weren't on the medal hidden away in his apartment, or on the lives he'd saved in combat. They were on the simple truth that had guided him through war and peace alike. Doing what was right, regardless of the cost. Marcus kept his hands visible on the steering wheel as Officer Kellerman approached his car. The setting sun cast long shadows across Arlington Road, and the patrol car's flashing lights created an unsettling strobe effect in his mirrors. "License and registration," Kellerman barked, shining her flashlight directly into Marcus's eyes despite the adequate daylight. Her tone carried the practiced hostility she reserved for what she considered easy targets. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied softly, reaching with deliberate slowness for his glove compartment. His military training had taught him to move with careful precision in tense situations. He retrieved his documents and handed them over with steady hands. Kellerman snatched the papers, barely glancing at them before tucking them under her arm. Her lip curled as she surveyed his sedan, its paint showing signs of age, but maintained with obvious care. "Step out of the vehicle," she commanded, her hand resting meaningfully on her holster. "We're going to conduct a routine inspection." Marcus recognized there was nothing routine about this stop, but his response remained measured. "Of course, officer." He opened his door slowly, maintaining a calm demeanor as he stood to his full height. His quiet dignity seemed to irritate Kellerman further. "Hands where I can see them," she snapped, though his hands were already clearly visible at his sides. "What are you doing in this neighborhood anyway? This is a respectable area." The implied accusation hung in the air. Marcus stood perfectly still, his voice steady as he replied, "I'm driving home from work, ma'am." Kellerman circled him like a predator, her boots scraping against the asphalt. "Work, huh? And what kind of work would that be?" Her tone dripped with skepticism as she eyed his modest clothing. "I serve at Arlington National Cemetery," Marcus answered simply, leaving out his role as an honor guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier. He never volunteered information about his service unless necessary. "Right," Kellerman scoffed, making a show of examining his car more closely. "And I suppose this piece of junk is the best you can afford on a groundskeeper's salary?" She ran her finger along the fender, leaving a deliberate smudge in the clean finish. Marcus felt a flicker of sadness, not for himself, but for the officer whose badge had become a weapon rather than a symbol of protection. "The car serves its purpose, ma'am." "Spread your legs, hands on the hood," Kellerman ordered, clearly frustrated by his composed responses. As Marcus complied, she began an aggressive pat-down that went well beyond professional boundaries. "You know," she continued, her voice taking on a mocking tone, "I see cars like yours all the time, usually carrying drugs or stolen goods. People who can't afford better vehicles tend to try making money in creative ways." Marcus remained silent, his palms steady against the warm metal of his car hood. The same patience that allowed him to stand guard for hours at the tomb now helped him endure this unnecessary harassment with dignity. "Nothing to say about that?" Kellerman pressed, stepping closer. "Most people get pretty upset when I suggest they might be criminals." "No, ma'am," Marcus replied quietly. "I have nothing to add." His continued composure seemed to infuriate her further. She yanked his wallet from his back pocket, spilling its contents across the hood. A few worn bills, a grocery store receipt, and his military ID scattered across the metal surface. "Well, well," Kellerman sneered, snatching up the military ID before Marcus could retrieve it. "Playing soldier too? Is there anything about you that's not a sad stereotype?" Marcus felt a deep pang in his chest, not for the insult to himself, but for the disrespect shown to the uniform he'd proudly worn. Still, he maintained his steady silence, knowing that engaging with her provocations would only escalate the situation. "I bet you bought this at some surplus store," she continued, waving his military ID dismissively. "Trying to get free meals at diners or something, right? People like you make me sick." The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the scene. Other cars passed slowly, their drivers turning to stare at the tall, dignified man being harassed by the aggressive officer. Marcus could see the mixture of sympathy and fear in their eyes. Sympathy for him, fear that they might be next. "Officer," he said softly, "if you're not charging me with anything, I would appreciate the return of my documents." Kellerman stepped closer, using her authority like a blunt instrument. "Oh, you'd appreciate that, would you?" "Well, I'd appreciate not having to waste my time with people who don't belong in this neighborhood. Maybe we both leave disappointed." She continued her pretense of searching his car, making a show of looking under seats and in the trunk, though she had no probable cause or warrant. Marcus stood exactly where she'd ordered him, his bearing straight but unthreatening, his patience evident in every controlled breath. "You know what I think?" Kellerman said, slamming his trunk shut with unnecessary force. "I think you're just another wannabe looking for handouts. Probably tell everyone you're some kind of hero, right? Bet you've got all kinds of stories about serving your country." The irony of her words might have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, Marcus felt only a deep sadness for how far she'd strayed from the true meaning of her badge. His own Medal of Honor remained tucked away at home, a private reminder of duty rather than a tool for recognition. "No, ma'am," he replied simply. "I don't tell those kinds of stories." The quiet dignity in his voice seemed to reach something in Kellerman, if only for a moment. She paused, studying his face as if seeing him clearly for the first time. But the moment passed, replaced by the hardened mask of authority she wore like armor. "Against the car," she ordered again, though he hadn't moved from that position. "We're not done here yet." Marcus watched silently as Officer Kellerman circled back to his car, her boots scraping against the asphalt with deliberate slowness. The last rays of sunlight caught her badge, making it glint like a warning. "Pop the trunk again," she ordered, though she'd already searched it thoroughly, "and unlock all the doors. We're going to do a proper search this time." "Officer," Marcus said quietly, "may I ask what probable cause—" "You can ask all you want after I'm done," Kellerman cut him off. "Or would you prefer I call for backup? Maybe add resisting to whatever else we find?" Marcus carefully reached into his pocket and pressed the unlock button on his key fob. As Kellerman yanked open his driver's side door, he discreetly activated his phone's recording function, letting it slip partially out of his pocket to capture the scene. The automatic cloud backup feature he'd installed after hearing about similar incidents would ensure the footage survived even if his phone didn't. Kellerman started with the glove compartment, pulling out his carefully organized maintenance records and insurance documents, letting them scatter across the passenger seat. "What's this?" she sneered, finding a small velvet box tucked in the back. She flipped it open and pulled out the combat infantryman badge inside. "Playing dress-up soldier again?" She tossed the badge onto the ground, where it landed in a puddle from the afternoon rain. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. "That's government property, ma'am." "Oh, is it?" Kellerman's laugh held no humor as she moved to the back seat. She found his gym bag and upended it, sending his workout clothes and a small wooden box tumbling onto the wet road. The box split open on impact, spilling his military medals across the asphalt. The Medal of Honor rolled to a stop against his boot. Marcus had brought it home that day to show a visiting veterans group, something he rarely did. Now it lay in a dirty puddle, its blue ribbon soaking up muddy water. "Well, look at this collection," Kellerman said, kicking the medals with her boot. "You must have spent a fortune at the surplus store. What's your game, anyway? Free drinks at bars? Discounts at restaurants?" She picked up the Medal of Honor with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate her. "This looks almost real. Must have cost you a pretty penny." Marcus took a slow, controlled breath. "I serve as a guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, ma'am." Kellerman's laugh turned harsh. "Right. Those guys who march around in fancy uniforms? Let me guess. You probably tell people you're some kind of war hero, too." She flicked the medal back onto the ground. "I've dealt with plenty of fakers like you. At least most of them put some effort into their stories." She moved to the trunk again, pulling out his spare uniform bag. The carefully pressed dress blues, which he treated with near religious reverence, she dumped unceremoniously onto the wet road. "Probably borrowed this from a costume shop," she said, grinding her heel against the fabric. Marcus felt a deep ache in his chest, not for himself but for what the uniform represented, the sacrifices of countless soldiers who'd given everything for their country. His phone continued recording as Kellerman's destruction grew more deliberate. She found his small notebook, filled with the names of fallen soldiers he'd promised to remember. "What's this? Your autograph book?" She ripped out several pages, letting them flutter away in the evening breeze. "Collecting signatures from real soldiers to make your story more convincing?" Marcus watched one of the pages land in a puddle, the ink beginning to blur. That name belonged to a young private who died, saving 3 of his squad mates. The soldier's mother had asked Marcus to remember him, and now that promise was dissolving in dirty water. "Officer," he said softly, "those names are important." "Important?" Kellerman stepped close, using her height advantage from the curb to look down at him. "You know what's important? Respect for law enforcement. Something you clearly need to learn." She returned to his car, pulling out the small American flag he kept folded in his center console. It was the flag that had draped his best friend's coffin before being presented to his widow. Marcus had been asked to keep it safe while she moved across country. Another prop? Kellerman unfurled the flag carelessly, letting it drag on the ground. "You people make me sick, playing soldier while real heroes are out there serving." The irony might have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Marcus's phone captured it all: the scattered medals, the ruined uniform, the desecrated flag, and Kellerman's running commentary of contempt. His military ID lay forgotten on the hood where she'd tossed it earlier, the Special Forces insignia clearly visible in the fading light. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Kellerman said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What are you really doing in this neighborhood?" "My duty, ma'am," Marcus replied quietly. "The same as always." His simple answer seemed to infuriate her further. She grabbed his service record folder from the passenger seat, the one containing documentation of his Medal of Honor citation. Without even glancing at it, she ripped it in half, letting the pieces join the rest of his scattered belongings on the wet ground. "Your duty?" she spat. Your duty is to answer my questions truthfully, not play make-believe with stolen valor and fake medals." The sun had fully set now, and Kellerman's patrol car lights painted the scene in alternating red and blue. They illuminated the growing circle of destruction around Marcus's car, his life's honors and memories scattered like debris after an explosion. His phone recorded it all, capturing every moment of Kellerman's escalating abuse of power. Through it all, Marcus maintained his quiet dignity, his bearing as straight as if he were standing guard at the tomb. Each breath came with the same measured control he'd learned in combat, each moment of silence carrying the weight of his years of service. The red and blue lights continued to strobe across the scattered remnants of Marcus's military honors as Kellerman circled him like a predator. Her flashlight beam swept across his face, deliberately trying to disorient him. The night had grown colder, but Marcus stood perfectly still, his posture remaining as disciplined as it was during his guard duty at the tomb. "You know what really gets me?" Kellerman's voice dripped with venom. "It's how committed you are to this act, standing there all straight and proper, like you're still putting on your little show for the tourists." Marcus remained silent, though his phone continued recording from his pocket. A car passed slowly on the road, its headlights illuminating the mud-stained Medal of Honor near his feet. The driver craned their neck to look, but didn't stop. "What's the matter? Lost your voice now?" Kellerman stepped closer, invading his personal space. Her breath was hot against his face. "Or maybe you're trying to remember what lines they taught you for your fake soldier routine?" The insult struck deeper than Marcus would ever show. Each word was a reminder of friends lost, of battles fought, of promises made to families of the fallen. But his expression remained neutral, his breathing steady and controlled. "I asked you a question, soldier boy." Kellerman's voice rose sharply. She reached down and picked up his soaked dress blues from the puddle, waving the dripping uniform in his face. "How much did this costume cost you? Did you buy it off some real veteran, or is it just a cheap knockoff?" Marcus watched a drop of dirty water fall from his uniform onto his shoe. The same uniform he'd worn while standing guard through hurricanes and blizzards, the one he'd maintained with meticulous care out of respect for what it represented. "Nothing to say?" Kellerman's face contorted with rage at his continued silence. "You know what I think? I think you're nothing but a pathetic wannabe soldier playing dress-up for tourists." Then, with deliberate slowness, she gathered saliva in her mouth and spat directly in Marcus's face. The glob of spittle struck his cheek and slowly dripped down toward his jaw. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't wipe it away, didn't break his stance. But something inside him ached, not for himself, but for what this moment represented, the desecration of everything he and his fellow soldiers had sacrificed for. Kellerman's eyes widened at his lack of reaction, her frustration visibly mounting. "Still nothing? Well, maybe this will get your attention." She stormed back to her patrol car, yanking open the driver's side door. Marcus remained motionless, feeling the cold trail of spittle on his cheek. His phone captured the sound of Kellerman rummaging through her vehicle, followed by her footsteps returning on the wet asphalt. "Let's see how well your little soldier act holds up in county lockup." Kellerman held up a small plastic bag filled with white powder. The streetlight caught it, making the contents sparkle ominously. "Amazing what you can find when you do a thorough vehicle search." She made a show of pulling on latex gloves, her movements exaggerated and theatrical. "I'm thinking this looks like about 50 grams. That's trafficking territory." She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Unless, of course, you suddenly remember why you're really in this neighborhood." Marcus watched as she approached his car, the bag of planted drugs held prominently in her gloved hand. His phone recorded every movement, every word. The metal at his feet reflected the flashing lights of the patrol car, a silent witness to this perversion of justice. "Last chance," Kellerman announced, pausing beside his open driver's side door. "Drop the tough guy act and tell me what I want to hear. or this bag goes in your glove compartment. Your choice." The night air grew heavy with tension. Another car passed, slowing briefly before speeding away. Marcus thought of all the others who must have faced similar moments of injustice without the protection of a recording device, without the weight of a Medal of Honor in their history. Kellerman took his silence as final defiance. "Have it your way, then." She leaned into his car, reaching for the glove compartment with the planted drugs. Her body language spoke of absolute confidence, of someone who had done this before and never faced consequences. The spittle had dried on Marcus's cheek, but he still hadn't moved to wipe it away. His bearing remained as steadfast as it had been through firefights and ambushes, through ceremonies honoring fallen comrades, through countless hours guarding those who had given everything for their country. The recording continued, capturing every second of Kellerman's methodical corruption. This moment of ultimate injustice stretched out in the darkness, marked by the rhythmic flash of red and blue, the soft patter of drips from his ruined uniform, and the quiet determination of a soldier who had faced worse threats than a corrupt officer with a bag of planted drugs. The beam of Kellerman's flashlight illuminated the interior of Marcus's car as she leaned in with the planted drugs. Her latex gloves squeaked against the plastic bag while she made a show of searching for the perfect spot to hide her evidence. The night air carried the distant sound of traffic from the highway, mixing with the steady pulse of the patrol car's emergency lights. "Let's see how this looks tucked right in here," Kellerman said, pulling open the glove compartment. She arranged the bag carefully, positioning it to be easily discoverable, during what she would later claim was a routine search. Perfect spot for... Her radio suddenly crackled to life, cutting through the tense silence. "All units, emergency bulletin." The dispatcher's voice was urgent, stripped of its usual professional calm. "School bus accident reported on River Ridge Road, 2 miles east of Arlington National Cemetery. Vehicle is partially suspended over Walker's Ravine. 30 children on board, driver unconscious. Bus position critical and unstable." Marcus's heart rate quickened. He knew Walker's Ravine well, a steep-sided gorge with a sharp drop of over 50 feet to the rocky stream below. In his mind's eye, he could see exactly where the bus must have gone off the road, right where the guardrail had been scheduled for repairs. The dispatcher continued, her voice growing more urgent. "Emergency services are 20 minutes out minimum. Any units with rescue training, please respond immediately. Situation classified as extremely critical. Repeat, 30 children in immediate danger." Kellerman barely glanced at her radio. "Dispatch, Unit 17. Negative on response. Engaged in priority arrest situation." She turned back to Marcus with a smirk. Now where were we? Marcus's military training kicked in automatically, his mind already calculating distances and response times. 20 minutes before professional help would arrive. 30 young lives hanging literally in the balance. He knew the unstable soil around Walker's Ravine wouldn't hold a teetering bus for long, especially not with recent rains having softened the ground. "Officer?" Marcus spoke for the first time since the spitting incident, his voice quiet but firm. "Those children need help now." Kellerman barely looked up from her work. "Shut up. You're in no position to give advice." She continued arranging the planted drugs, taking extra time to ensure they would be easily visible. "Besides, I'm sure someone else will handle it." The radio crackled again. "Update on bus situation. Vehicle showing signs of movement. No other units available to respond. Any officers in vicinity, please acknowledge." Marcus could picture the scene. 30 terrified children trapped in a bus that could plunge into the ravine at any moment. His Special Forces training had included vehicle rescue operations, and he'd handled similar situations in Afghanistan. Every second they delayed put those children at greater risk. "Officer Kellerman," he said, using her name for the first time, "I have extensive rescue training. Let me help them." She straightened up, her face twisted with contempt. "Right. More lies from the fake soldier. You're not going anywhere except jail." She pulled out her handcuffs, the metal gleaming in the strobing lights. "Now turn around and put your hands behind your back." The radio came to life once more. Urgent update, bus shifting position, multiple children visible through windows, showing signs of panic. Situation deteriorating rapidly. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, seeing the faces of other children he'd helped evacuate from dangerous situations overseas. When he opened them again, his decision was made. His voice took on the quiet authority that had commanded troops in combat. "Officer, you have two choices right now. You can either drive me to that bus and let me help save those children, or you can arrest me. But if you choose to arrest me, you'll have to explain to 30 families why you prioritized a false arrest over their children's lives." Kellerman's hand tightened on the handcuffs. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. My phone has been recording this entire encounter. Everything from the illegal stop to the planted drugs is already uploaded to cloud storage. You can still choose what happens next." The radio dispatcher's voice cut through again, more desperate now. "Any units, please respond. Bus continuing to shift. Ground stability deteriorating." Kellerman's face worked through a series of emotions: anger, uncertainty, fear. The handcuffs trembled slightly in her grip as the reality of her situation sank in. She glanced at her radio, then at Marcus, then at the bag of drugs still visible in the glove compartment. The choice hung in the air between them, accompanied by the steady flash of emergency lights and the distant sound of wind through the trees. 30 young lives balanced against one officer's corrupt agenda. The moment stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity as Marcus waited for her decision. The dispatcher's voice came one more time, breaking the tension. "Update, ground continuing to give way beneath bus. Estimate less than 15 minutes before complete structural failure. Any available units, please respond immediately." Kellerman's handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists with a cold finality. She roughly shoved him into the back of her patrol car, slamming the door with unnecessary force. Through the window, Marcus could see her retrieving the planted drugs from his vehicle, holding the bag up with a triumphant smirk. The radio continued its urgent updates. Ground stability critical. Multiple children reporting bus movement. Estimate 12 minutes before complete failure. Marcus closed his eyes, his special forces training kicking in as he assessed his situation. The partition between the front and back seats was standard police issue. The rear doors were locked from the outside. His hands were secured behind his back. But he hadn't survived 3 tours in Afghanistan by accepting impossible situations. Kellerman was still busy documenting her evidence, taking photos with her phone. Marcus twisted his wrists within the handcuffs, feeling for weakness. During his military training, he'd learned techniques for escaping restraints, knowledge he'd hoped never to need as a civilian. The cuffs were tight, but Kellerman had made a crucial mistake in her haste and anger. She hadn't double-locked them. Using the technique he'd learned years ago, Marcus pressed his wrists together and rotated them slowly, ignoring the metal, biting into his skin. A thin trickle of blood ran down his palm, but he kept working. The dispatcher's voice provided a grim countdown: 11 minutes to estimated structural failure. With a barely audible click, the handcuff's ratchet mechanism gave way. Marcus pulled his hands free, wincing at the raw skin around his wrists. Through the window, he could see Kellerman still occupied with her phone, documenting what she thought would be career-making arrest evidence. The rear door's lock mechanism was designed to prevent escape, but Marcus knew its weakness. He'd once helped design improved patrol car security after a series of prisoner escapes. Taking a deep breath, he braced himself, then drove his elbow hard into the precise spot where the lock assembly met the door frame. The door burst open with a sharp crack. Before Kellerman could fully turn around, Marcus was already sprinting toward the tree line. He heard her shout of rage, followed by the sound of her scrambling to give chase. "Stop! Stop, or I'll shoot!" Kellerman's voice carried the edge of someone unused to losing control. Marcus didn't slow down. His feet found purchase on the uneven ground as he ran, his mind already mapping the fastest route to Walker's Ravine. 2 miles through dense woods, 8 minutes at top speed, if he pushed himself to his absolute limit. The bus might not have that long. Behind him, Kellerman crashed through the underbrush, her police radio squawking updates about the bus. She was in good shape for a patrol officer, but Marcus's military conditioning gave him an edge. Still, he couldn't afford to lose her completely. He might need her help with the rescue. "Washington, you're making it worse for yourself." Kellerman's voice was closer than he'd expected. "Stop now." Marcus vaulted over a fallen tree, his muscles burning with effort. The woods were dark, but his night vision was excellent, another gift from his military training. He could hear Kellerman stumbling over roots and branches behind him, her breath coming in angry gasps. The radio crackled again. 9 minutes to estimated structural failure, bus reporting increased tilting, multiple children crying. Marcus pushed himself harder, ignoring the sting of branches whipping across his face. Every second counted now. In his mind, he could hear the terrified voices of those 30 children, feel the bus shifting beneath them as the ground slowly gave way. Kellerman's footsteps were growing fainter, but her voice carried through the trees. "I will find you. You can't escape." The edge of the ravine was visible now, a darker line against the night sky. Marcus could see the flashing hazard lights of the bus, tilted at a sickening angle over the drop. The vehicle's weight had carved deep grooves in the soft earth, and even from this distance, he could see it sliding fractionally closer to the edge. Behind him, Kellerman's voice rang out one more time, closer again. "Stop. This is your final warning." Marcus kept running. The bus was less than 50 yards away now. He could see small faces pressed against the windows, hands waving frantically for help. The ground beneath the vehicle's back wheels was visibly crumbling. Kellerman burst through the trees behind him, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Washington, don't move another step." But Marcus was already assessing the situation, his military training taking over completely. The bus's front end was wedged against a tree, the only thing preventing an immediate plunge into the ravine. The back end was suspended over empty air, supported only by rapidly eroding soil. Through the windows, he could see 30 young faces watching him, their eyes wide with fear. The radio on Kellerman's belt delivered its most urgent update yet. 7 minutes to complete structural failure. Any units in vicinity, please respond immediately. Marcus took another step toward the bus, knowing that every second of delay put those children closer to disaster. Behind him, he heard Kellerman's shoes crunching on loose gravel as she closed the distance between them. "I said don't move." Her voice cracked with fury and frustration. "You're under arrest." Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the bus, watching as another chunk of earth crumbled away beneath its wheels. He spoke without turning around, his voice steady and clear. "Officer Kellerman, there are 30 children about to die. You can either help me save them, or you can watch them fall. Make your choice." The school bus teetered on the edge of Walker's Ravine, its yellow frame ghostly in the gathering dusk. Marcus's heart stopped for a moment as he took in the full horror of the scene. The massive vehicle hung suspended over a 60-foot drop, its front end wedged against a lone oak tree while its rear wheels spun helplessly in empty air. Only a few twisted strips of guardrail metal, bent like paper clips, kept 30 young lives from plummeting into the darkness below. The bus groaned, shifting another inch toward the abyss. Small faces pressed against every window, their eyes wide with terror. Some children were crying, others frozen in shock. Through the windshield, Marcus could see the driver slumped unconscious over the steering wheel, a thin trail of blood running down his temple. "Dear God," Kellerman whispered behind him, her anger forgotten as she finally saw what they were dealing with. The bus lurched again, drawing screams from the children inside. Marcus's military training kicked in automatically, his mind calculating angles, weights, and leverage points. The guardrail wouldn't hold much longer. maybe 5 minutes at best. The nearest emergency services were at least 15 minutes out. Simple math told him those children didn't have time to wait. He scanned the bus's frame, noting where the metal had buckled and where it still held strong. The side emergency exits were useless. Opening them would only destabilize the vehicle further. The rear door was suspended over the ravine. That left only the front door, pressed awkwardly against the oak tree's thick trunk. "We need rope," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady despite the urgency burning in his chest. "Something strong enough to secure the bus and help get those kids out." Kellerman shook her head. "I don't have any in my patrol car." Another shift, another chorus of terrified screams. The bus's frame screamed in protest as more guardrail strips snapped with sharp metallic pings. Marcus was already moving, climbing carefully through the shattered windshield. Glass crunched under his feet as he made his way to the first row of seats. The children watched in silent desperation as he pulled out his pocket knife and began cutting through the thick seat belts. "What are you doing?" Kellerman called from outside. "Making rope," Marcus replied, his hands working quickly. "These belts are rated for major impacts. Tied together, they'll hold." He'd learned this technique during survival training, though he'd never imagined using it to save a bus full of children. The youngest kids were in the front, 6- and 7-year-olds with tear-streaked faces and trembling lips. Marcus spoke to them in the same steady voice he used at the tomb of the unknown soldier. "Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus, and I'm here to help you. I know you're scared, but I need you to be very brave and very still. Can you do that for me?" Small heads nodded. A little girl in a pink sweater whispered, "Yes, sir." Marcus worked methodically, cutting and knotting the seat belts into a makeshift rope while keeping up a gentle stream of reassuring words. "You're all doing great. Just stay in your seats. Help is coming." The bus shifted again, more violently this time. Several children screamed, and Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. He grabbed a seat back to steady himself, his heart pounding. Through the windows, he could see more sections of the guardrail beginning to fail. "Officer Kellerman," he called out, his voice remaining remarkably calm. "I need you to secure these ropes to your patrol car. We'll anchor the bus to buy more time." To her credit, Kellerman didn't hesitate. She caught the first length of knotted seatbelts as Marcus tossed it through the broken windshield. "The car's about 50 yards back," she said, already moving. "Make it fast," Marcus replied, turning back to the children. Some of the older ones had started to panic, pushing against their seats and causing the bus to sway dangerously. "Everyone listen to me." Marcus projected his voice to the back of the bus, using the command presence that had served him well in combat situations. "I know this is scary, but moving around will only make things worse. I need everyone to sit absolutely still. Can you help me do that?" His firm but gentle tone had an immediate effect. The children settled, though their frightened eyes remained fixed on him. Marcus continued working, transforming more seatbelts into rescue ropes while monitoring the bus's increasingly unstable position. A sharp crack from outside made everyone jump. Another section of guardrail had given way, and the bus lurched sickeningly toward the ravine. Several children began to cry again, and Marcus could feel the vehicle's weight shifting dangerously. "It's okay," he said quickly, maintaining his calm demeanor despite the cold fear in his gut. "That sound means we need to hurry, but we're going to be fine. I promise." He glanced at the unconscious driver, knowing they'd need to get him out too. But the children had to come first. The youngest and lightest would be easiest to move without destabilizing the bus further. Kellerman's voice called from outside, "Ropes are secured." Marcus could feel the slight tension in the makeshift lines, not enough to fully stabilize the bus, but perhaps enough to slow its fall if the worst happened. He turned to the small girl in the pink sweater, keeping his voice gentle and assured. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "Emily," she whispered. "Emily, you're going to be my special helper. We're going to play a game called Quiet as a Mouse. And you're going first. Can you show everyone how brave you can be?" Emily nodded, her lower lip trembling but her eyes fixed trustingly on Marcus's face. The other children watched intently, their own fear momentarily forgotten as they focused on their classmate. The bus creaked ominously, and Marcus knew their time was running desperately short. He could hear sirens in the distance, but they were still too far away. Whatever happened next, he would have to handle it alone. He looked at the 30 young faces watching him, their lives quite literally hanging in the balance, and took a deep breath. The next few minutes would determine whether this became a miracle or a tragedy, and Marcus Washington had seen enough tragedy in his lifetime. The makeshift ropes swayed gently in the evening breeze, waiting to be put to use. Marcus squared his shoulders, ready to begin the most important rescue mission of his life. Marcus secured the last knot in his makeshift harness, testing the strength of the joined seatbelts. "Emily," he said softly to the little girl in pink, "are you ready to be brave?" She nodded, clutching her backpack tightly to her chest. The bus shifted again, drawing whimpers from the other children. "Arms around my neck, legs around my waist," Marcus instructed, kneeling beside Emily's seat. "Just like a piggyback ride? Can you do that for me?" Emily wrapped herself around him, trembling but determined. Marcus could feel her rapid heartbeat against his back as he carefully made his way to the front of the bus. "Officer Kellerman," he called out, "be ready to receive her." The first descent was the most crucial. He needed to show the other children that the rescue would work. Marcus gripped the knotted seatbelt rope firmly and began lowering himself and Emily through the broken windshield. The bus groaned in protest at the movement, and several more pieces of guardrail snapped with sharp pings. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," Marcus said as they dangled over the ravine. "You're doing great." Hand over hand, he rappelled down the steep incline, keeping his movements smooth and controlled. Years of military training guided every motion. This wasn't so different from extracting wounded soldiers under fire, except now his cargo was a terrified 6-year-old. Kellerman stood ready at the top of the ravine, her earlier hostility replaced by professional focus. As Marcus neared the top, she reached down and lifted Emily to safety. The little girl immediately burst into tears, but she had shown the others it could be done. "One down, 29 to go," Marcus said, already climbing back toward the bus. His arms burned from supporting their combined weight, but he pushed the discomfort aside. The next child was waiting. Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus settled into a grueling rhythm. Climb up, secure a child, rappel down, climb back up. Each trip threatened to be their last, as the bus inched closer to disaster. The makeshift anchor ropes creaked under the strain, but somehow held. "You're a superhero," whispered a small boy as Marcus carried him to safety. "No, buddy," Marcus replied, carefully navigating a particularly treacherous section. "I just help people who need it." By the 12th rescue, his muscles were screaming in protest. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool evening air, and his hands were raw from the rough seatbelt material. But Marcus maintained his calm demeanor, knowing the children were watching his every expression for signs of fear. The bus suddenly lurched violently, dropping several inches as more guardrail supports failed. Screams erupted from inside, and the children still waiting began to panic. "Everyone stay still," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Remember what we practiced, hands on your heads, feet on the floor." The children responded instantly to his authoritative tone, assuming the position he'd taught them. Their quick compliance probably saved their lives as the bus stabilized, teetering even more precariously over the edge. "We're running out of time," Kellerman called up, genuine concern in her voice. Marcus nodded grimly. He could hear the approaching sirens getting closer, but they still had 18 children to evacuate. The metal frame of the bus was beginning to bend under its own weight, and the remaining guardrail pieces looked ready to snap at any moment. He picked up his pace, pushing his exhausted body to move faster, while still maintaining the careful precision needed to keep the children calm. Up and down, up and down, each trip a battle against gravity and fatigue. Some of the older kids helped by organizing the remaining students by size, making it easier for Marcus to plan his movements. A fourth-grade teacher would have been proud of their orderly line, even as death loomed just inches away. "Only 10 more," Marcus encouraged them, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're all being so brave." Another sharp crack echoed through the ravine as the bus shifted again. The remaining children cried out in terror, but maintained their positions as Marcus had taught them. Their trust in him was absolute. Their young faces turned to him like flowers, following the sun. The final phase of the evacuation was the most dangerous. The bus, now lighter by 20 children, had become increasingly unstable. Each movement threatened to send it tumbling into the abyss, taking the remaining students with it. Marcus's arms felt like lead, his fingers barely able to grip the rope. But he forced himself to maintain the same calm confidence he'd shown from the beginning. The children's lives depended on his strength, both physical and emotional. 5 more, he announced, securing a small girl with pigtails to his back. "We're almost done." The descent with his 26th rescue was nearly disastrous. Halfway down, a major section of the guardrail gave way with a thunderous crack. The bus lurched sideways, nearly pulling the anchor ropes free. Marcus hung on grimly, shielding the child with his body as debris rained down around them. "Don't look down," he whispered to the girl, who had begun to sob. "Keep your eyes closed and count to 10. When you open them, you'll be safe." Somehow he got her to the top. His hands were bleeding now, leaving smears on the makeshift rope, but he barely noticed the pain. 4 more children were counting on him. The final rescues were a blur of desperate movement and encouraging words. Marcus operated purely on instinct and training, his body moving mechanically through motions it was too exhausted to properly feel. The last child, a stocky boy of about 11, was barely clear of the bus when the remaining guardrail supports failed completely. With a screech of tortured metal, the empty bus began its final plunge into the ravine. Marcus and the boy were still dangling on the rope, less than 10 feet from the top. Using his last reserves of strength, he practically threw the child up toward Kellerman's waiting arms. The ground trembled as the bus crashed into the ravine below, the sound of its impact echoing off the rocky walls. But Marcus barely heard it. His focus was entirely on the 30 children now huddled safely at the top of the slope, their faces a mixture of relief and awe. Emergency vehicles were arriving, their lights painting the scene in flashing red and blue. Paramedics rushed forward to check on the children, but most of them just pointed at Marcus, who still hung from his rope a few feet below the edge. "He saved us," they said. "The soldier saved us." Officer Kellerman arrived at the ravine's edge just as Marcus began his final, most dangerous descent. The unconscious bus driver remained slumped over the steering wheel, the last soul left in the precariously balanced vehicle. 30 children huddled behind the police tape, wrapped in emergency blankets, their eyes fixed on the man who had saved their lives. "He's going back down," one of the kids whispered in disbelief, "even after all that." Kellerman watched as Marcus rappelled down the makeshift rope one last time. His movements were slower now, heavy with exhaustion. Blood from his raw hands left dark stains on the twisted seat belts he used as a lifeline. The officer felt something twist in her chest as she realized this was the same man she had handcuffed and humiliated less than an hour ago. The bus creaked ominously as Marcus reached the shattered windshield. Metal groaned against metal, and several children gasped as the vehicle shifted another few inches toward the abyss. But Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled himself inside, his movements precise, despite his obvious fatigue. "Sir," Kellerman called out, surprising herself, "the rescue teams are here now. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Marcus replied simply, already working to free the driver from her seatbelt. The gathering crowd of emergency responders and newly arrived parents fell silent, watching the drama unfold. News vans began pulling up to the scene, their satellite dishes extending skyward as reporters rushed to capture what was clearly becoming a major story. Inside the bus, Marcus worked quickly but carefully to stabilize the driver's neck and spine. The woman was breathing steadily, but remained unconscious, likely from the impact of the crash. He could hear the vehicle's frame bending under the strain, feel the subtle shifts as gravity pulled it inexorably toward the edge. "Ma'am, I'm going to get you out of here," he said to the unconscious driver, securing her with the last intact seatbelt he could find. "Just hold on." The most challenging part would be managing her dead weight during the climb. Marcus had carried wounded comrades before, but never in such precarious conditions. He positioned himself carefully, distributing the driver's weight across his back and shoulders. Just as he reached the windshield, the bus lurched violently. The remaining guardrail supports screamed in protest as the vehicle dropped several feet. Marcus lunged forward, pushing the driver through the opening ahead of him while maintaining his grip on the rope with one bloodied hand. "Take her!" he shouted up to the rescue workers. Two firefighters reached down, catching the driver's arms and pulling her to safety just as the bus gave another sickening lurch. Marcus hung suspended over the ravine, his strength nearly spent. The rope swayed wildly as the bus began its final collapse. "Jump!" someone screamed. "The rope's going to—" Marcus didn't wait to hear the rest. He pushed off from the bus with his legs, swinging away from the falling vehicle. The momentum carried him toward the ravine wall just as the rope's anchor point tore free. He hit the rocky slope hard, but managed to grab onto an exposed root. The bus crashed into the ravine below with a thunderous impact that echoed off the walls. A cloud of dust and debris billowed upward as the vehicle crumpled like a tin can. When the dust cleared, Marcus was climbing the last few feet to safety, pulled up by the waiting rescue workers. He stumbled as his feet touched solid ground, his legs finally giving out after nearly an hour of constant strain. The paramedics rushed forward, but Marcus waved them toward the unconscious driver instead. "Check her first?" he insisted. "I'm fine." The children broke through the police tape, swarming around their rescuer. Little hands reached out to touch him as if making sure he was real. Their voices overlapped in an excited chorus, "You saved us." "That was amazing. Are you really okay?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you." News crews pushed forward, cameras rolling as they captured the heartwarming scene. Marcus sat on the ground, surrounded by the children he'd rescued, his quiet dignity a sharp contrast to his battered appearance. Parents rushed forward to embrace their kids, many of them turning to thank Marcus through tears of relief. Kellerman stood back, watching, as reporters began gathering details for their stories. She could see the moment several children pointed to her, explaining how she had helped catch them, as Marcus brought them up. But she also saw one of the older kids pull out a phone, showing something to a reporter who suddenly looked very interested. The officer felt her stomach drop as she realized what must be happening. Marcus's phone had been recording their entire encounter: the harassment, the illegal search, the spitting, the attempted frame-up. And now, with dozens of witnesses and cameras present, the truth about both their characters would soon be revealed. Marcus caught her eye across the crowd. There was no triumph in his expression, no desire for revenge. He simply nodded once, acknowledging her presence, before turning his attention back to the children still clustering around him, each eager to share their part of the story with the growing media presence. The wail of additional sirens announced the arrival of more emergency vehicles and news crews. Camera flashes lit up the darkening scene as photographers captured images of the rescued children, the crashed bus below, and the humble hero who had risked everything to save them. The story was already taking shape, a story that would reveal not just Marcus's incredible rescue, but the full truth about the events that had led him to this moment. "Wait a minute," a veteran reporter from Channel 7 said, squinting at Marcus through the gathering dusk. "I know this man." She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen as she searched through archived footage. The crowd around Marcus grew quiet as the reporter's eyes widened with recognition. "This is Sergeant First Class Marcus Washington," she announced, her voice carrying across the rescue scene. He received the Medal of Honor 2 years ago. The ceremony went viral. Millions of people watched it. The revelation rippled through the crowd. Parents who had been hugging their rescued children turned to stare at Marcus with newfound amazement. One of the firefighters, a veteran himself, immediately snapped to attention and saluted. "I remember that ceremony," another parent said, pulling up the video on his phone. He saved his entire unit from a terrorist ambush in Afghanistan. But instead of talking about himself, he spent his whole acceptance speech honoring the soldiers who didn't make it home. The original video began playing from several phones, its audio carrying clearly in the evening air. Marcus's voice from 2 years ago rang out. "This medal doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the brothers we lost, the ones who made the ultimate sacrifice. They are the true heroes." Marcus sat quietly as his past was revealed, still focused on comforting the children around him. A paramedic wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, insisting on treating his bleeding hands. "And now he's saved our children," a mother said, tears streaming down her face. "After what that officer did to him?" She turned to glare at Kellerman, who had begun backing away from the scene. The older student who had shown his phone to the reporter stepped forward. "I recorded everything," he announced. The officer pulled him over for no reason. "She destroyed his car, threw his military medals on the ground, and—" The boy's voice shook with anger. "She spit in his face, called him a fake soldier, and then, when the call came in about our bus, she ignored it to plant drugs in his car." The video was already spreading across social media platforms, clips showing Kellerman's abuse of power juxtaposed against Marcus's subsequent heroism began trending within minutes. News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights illuminating the dramatic scene below. "She spit on a Medal of Honor recipient?" A police sergeant who had just arrived looked horrified. "While children needed help?" Parents began surrounding Kellerman, their phones recording her increasingly panicked expression. "You ignored the call about our children?" one father demanded. "They could have died while you were harassing a war hero?" Two serious-looking men in suits emerged from an unmarked federal vehicle, flashing their badges as they approached Kellerman. "Officer Brenda Kellerman," one announced formally. "We're with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We've been building a case against you for months, and now we have everything we need." The federal agents had arrived just in time to witness the crowd's reaction to the viral videos. One agent turned to his partner. "This is the final nail. Pattern of harassment, abuse of power, false arrests, planting evidence, and now this." Kellerman's face had gone pale as she realized the full magnitude of her situation. The footage of her spitting on a Medal of Honor recipient while ignoring a bus full of endangered children would destroy any chance of defending her actions. Meanwhile, more details about Marcus's military service emerged as reporters dug through their archives. His humble dedication as a tomb guard, his countless hours standing watch over the unknown soldier in all weather, his absolute refusal to seek recognition for his service. All of it painted a picture that stood in stark contrast to Kellerman's corruption. "He never even mentioned being a Medal of Honor recipient," one of the rescued children said, still sitting close to Marcus. "He just kept telling us to stay calm, that everything would be okay. He said he'd get every single one of us out, no matter what." The FBI agents led Kellerman away in handcuffs, but few people noticed. The attention remained focused on Marcus, who was finally allowing paramedics to treat his injuries. His hands were raw and torn from the makeshift rope, his clothes were covered in dirt and blood, but his quiet dignity remained unshaken. A reporter thrust a microphone toward him. "Sergeant Washington, how does it feel to be a hero again?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "I'm not the hero here," he said softly. "These children showed incredible courage today. They stayed calm, helped each other, and trusted a stranger to get them to safety. That's what real bravery looks like." Parents began sharing the video of his response, which went viral almost immediately. The contrast between his humility and Kellerman's arrogance sparked a national conversation about service, sacrifice, and the abuse of power. As federal investigators collected statements from witnesses, Marcus's phone recording of the traffic stop provided crucial evidence. The clear audio of Kellerman's threats, her deliberate destruction of his property, and her attempt to plant false evidence would prove devastating in court. The parents of the rescued children organized themselves, demanding justice not just for Marcus, but for any other victims of Kellerman's corruption. Their viral posts and interviews caught the attention of civil rights organizations and police accountability groups across the country. He risked his life to save our children, right after being assaulted by a police officer, one mother told reporters, her voice breaking. If that doesn't show you what real character looks like, I don't know what does. The story continued to unfold as more details emerged about both Marcus's heroism and Kellerman's history of misconduct. But through it all, Marcus remained focused on the children, ensuring each one was safely reunited with their parents before finally allowing himself to be taken to the hospital for treatment. The revelation of his identity had transformed a local rescue story into a national conversation about heroism, duty, and justice. But for Marcus Washington, Medal of Honor recipient and guardian of the unknown soldier, it was simply another day of living up to the values he had always believed in: service before self, duty before recognition, and doing what's right regardless of the personal cost. Officer Brenda Kellerman stood in handcuffs, watching her career and reputation crumble in real time. On dozens of phones around her, the video of her assault on Marcus Washington played on repeat. The footage was crystal clear, her contemptuous voice calling him a wannabe soldier, the arc of her spit landing on his face, her casual dismissal of the emergency call about the school bus. Social media exploded with outrage. Local news stations interrupted their regular programming to show split-screen images. On one side, Marcus's Medal of Honor ceremony from 2 years ago. On the other, Kellerman's brutal treatment of him just hours earlier. Over 1 million views in 20 minutes, a reporter announced, holding up her phone. The hashtag Justice for Marcus is trending nationwide. Kellerman's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees in the gathering darkness. The gravity of her actions crashed down upon her as she watched parents comfort their rescued children she had ignored in favor of pursuing her vendetta. The same children Marcus had saved while his hands were still raw from her handcuffs. More vehicles arrived at the scene. A group of veterans, having recognized Marcus from the viral footage, formed a protective circle around him. They wore their service medals and stood at attention, creating a stark visual contrast to Kellerman's disgrace. "Please," Kellerman called out to Marcus, her voice cracking. "You don't understand? I was just doing my job. That's all it was, just following procedure." Her words rang hollow even to her own ears. The crowd's murmurs turned angry. "Following procedure?" a father shouted. "Was it procedure to ignore 30 children in danger? To plant false evidence? To spit on a Medal of Honor recipient?" Marcus stood quietly, still wrapped in the emergency blanket. Despite his exhaustion and injuries, he maintained the same dignified bearing he showed at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The federal agents flanking him waited for his response. "Just doing your job?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice soft, but carrying clearly in the hushed silence. "Your job was to protect and serve. Instead, you chose to abuse your power and ignore citizens in danger." He paused, looking at the children he'd rescued. A badge isn't a shield for cruelty. It's a symbol of public trust. Kellerman began to sob, mascara running down her face. "Please don't press charges. I'll lose everything. My pension, my reputation, everything I've worked for." The FBI agent in charge stepped forward, reading from his tablet. "We've documented 17 similar incidents in the past 6 months alone. False arrests, planted evidence, excessive force, all targeting vulnerable citizens who couldn't fight back." "I have children," Kellerman pleaded, looking around desperately. "Think about my family." A mother stepped forward, her rescued daughter clinging to her hand. "We were thinking about our families while you were busy harassing a hero. Our children could have died today because of your actions." Marcus raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Despite his torn clothes and bandaged hands, he commanded the scene with quiet authority. "Officer Kellerman, you're right about one thing. This will cost you everything, not because of revenge, but because of justice." He turned to face the gathering crowd, his voice strengthening. "Heroes don't seek revenge. We seek justice, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who couldn't stand up to abuse of power. Your badge was meant to protect people, not terrorize them." The FBI agents moved to help Kellerman to her feet. "Brenda Kellerman, you're under arrest for multiple federal civil rights violations, including deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, and criminal conspiracy." As the agents led her toward their vehicle, Kellerman looked back one last time at Marcus. The man she had dismissed as an easy target stood surrounded by grateful parents, fellow veterans, and rescued children. Her attempt to humiliate him had instead revealed his true character to the world. "The U.S. Attorney's Office will be reviewing every arrest you've made," the senior FBI agent informed her. "Every traffic stop, every search, every piece of evidence. Your victims will finally have their day in court." A police lieutenant who had arrived on scene approached Marcus, removing his own badge. "On behalf of every honest police officer who takes their oath seriously, I apologize. What happened here today was a disgrace to the badge." Marcus nodded solemnly. "The badge isn't tarnished by exposing corruption. It's strengthened by it. Every officer who serves with honor is part of today's justice." The FBI vehicle carrying Kellerman drove away, but the scene at the rescue site continued to unfold. Parents organized a spontaneous collection for Marcus's car repairs. Veterans groups offered legal support. Civil rights organizations promised to investigate similar cases of abuse. Through it all, Marcus maintained his humble demeanor, deflecting praise and checking on the children he'd rescued. His quiet dignity in the face of both injustice and acclaim demonstrated why he had earned his nation's highest military honor. The viral video of his response to Kellerman's plea would be viewed millions of times. "Heroes don't seek revenge. We seek justice." The words would become a rallying cry for police reform advocates and a reminder that true heroism often speaks in whispers, not shouts. As night fell over the rescue scene, Kellerman's world had indeed collapsed, not through revenge, but through the simple power of justice, served with quiet dignity. 2 weeks after the school bus rescue, Marcus Washington stood in the East Room of the White House, his dress uniform perfectly pressed. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the faces of 30 rescued children and their families who had been invited to witness this moment. The president approached the podium, his voice carrying through the historic room. "Today, we honor a man who has demonstrated extraordinary heroism not once, but twice, in service to our nation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington already wears the Medal of Honor for his courage in Afghanistan. Now he has shown us once again that true heroism isn't just about facing enemy fire. It's about maintaining dignity in the face of injustice and risking everything to save others." Marcus stood at attention, his eyes forward, as the president continued. When faced with corrupt authority, he showed restraint. When 30 children needed help, he broke free from unlawful detention to save them. This is the essence of what makes America great. Not power, but character. The presidential commendation was presented amid thunderous applause, but Marcus's attention was drawn to someone standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Rebecca Chen, the trauma counselor who had helped the children process their near-death experience, watched the ceremony with thoughtful eyes. Over the past 2 weeks, they had crossed paths several times as she worked with the families, and something about her genuine dedication to helping others had caught his attention. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled during the reception, Rebecca approached him. "That speech barely captured what you did," she said, her voice warm and direct. "I've been counseling those children, and do you know what they remember most? Not the danger, but how calm you kept them. How you made each one feel safe, even while hanging over that ravine. Marcus smiled slightly, uncomfortable with praise, as always. I just did what needed to be done. You're the one helping them heal. That's what struck me about you, Rebecca continued, her eyes meeting his. Everyone's talking about the dramatic rescue, but I've watched you visit the children in therapy. You remember each of their names. You ask about their nightmares. That's not just heroism. That's humanity. Their conversation was interrupted by news from the Justice Department. Officer Kellerman's case had moved swiftly through the system, backed by overwhelming evidence. She had accepted a plea deal, facing 8 years in federal prison and permanent loss of her law enforcement certification. More importantly, her case had triggered a broader investigation into similar abuses of power. The system worked this time, Rebecca observed, as they discussed the news over coffee in the White House garden. But how many others suffered in silence before you exposed her? Marcus nodded solemnly. That's why I didn't fight back when she assaulted me. The phone recording wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about protecting the next person she would have targeted. Over the following months, as Marcus returned to his duties at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, his path continued to cross with Rebecca's. She had taken a position at a nearby veterans counseling center, helping soldiers process their combat experiences. They found themselves sharing lunch breaks, discussing their shared commitment to service and healing. You know what amazes me? Rebecca said one autumn afternoon as they walked near Arlington National Cemetery. You guard the unknown soldiers with the same dedication you showed saving those children. It's all connected for you, isn't it? Honoring the dead, protecting the living. Marcus paused, considering her words. Every step at the tomb is a reminder that service isn't about recognition. Those unknown soldiers gave everything, including their names. How can I do any less than my absolute best to honor them? Their relationship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect and understanding. Rebecca appreciated Marcus's quiet strength, while he was drawn to her compassionate wisdom. They both understood that true heroism often happened in small, unnoticed moments, in listening to a troubled veteran, in comforting a frightened child, in standing guard through long nights at the tomb. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the Memorial Bridge, Rebecca touched the Medal of Honor ribbon on Marcus's uniform. You know what makes you different? It's not the medals or the commendations. It's that you never let power or recognition change who you are. You're the same person guarding the tomb at 3 a.m. as you are receiving awards at the White House. Marcus took her hand, his weathered fingers gentle against hers. You see people the same way, not as cases or statistics, but as human beings who need healing. That's its own kind of courage. Their love story wasn't dramatic or flashy. It grew from shared values, from quiet conversations about service and purpose, from understanding that the greatest acts of heroism often go unnoticed by the world. As they built their life together, they created a home filled with the same dignity and compassion they showed in their work. The media eventually moved on to other stories. Officer Kellerman's trial faded from the headlines. But in therapy offices and at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the work of healing and honoring continued. Marcus and Rebecca demonstrated daily that love built on authentic connection and shared values could triumph over corruption and hatred. Marcus continued his precise steps at the tomb, guarding the unknown heroes with unwavering dedication. Rebecca continued helping veterans and families rebuild their lives. Together, they proved that true heroism isn't about seeking the spotlight, it's about lighting the way for others, one quiet step at a time. Their story became part of the larger narrative of healing and justice, proving that even in moments of darkness, dignity and love could prevail. Not through dramatic gestures or public acclaim, but through the steady commitment to serving others and honoring what was right. If this one resonated with you, stick around. I've got another story waiting for you tomorrow, and who knows, it might be just what you needed to hear.